Assalamu alaikum. I pray and I hope that all of you are hopefully busy. Don't get at all worked up. Don't be nervous. Keep your hope up. The future is yours. And we can always communicate thanks to this technology. After the last lecture of Industrialization of America, it is natural to talk about the modernization of America. The speed, the new technology, the light, it all gave America confidence to move on. So it is basically a story of the impact of industrialization on every individual's life. Middle class families came up after the industrialization of America, and when Lincoln took office in 1861, Emerson said that a middle class country has got a middle class president. The Civil War sapped the culture of the middle class because of its reforming zeal. And the middle class family similarly lost some of its moral fervor and gained a new substantiality. The transition can be summarized by comparing the March family in Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. What a wonderful book it is, written between 1868 and 1869. With William Dean Howell's Laphams in The Rise of Silas Lapham. These always, the literature comes to our rescue for giving those details that sometimes history does not record. Historians have long been asserting that middle-class family relations were similarly stiff and in matters pertaining to sexuality downright prudish. The historians of today might be thinking that way. But the middle-class mothers at the end of the century had 2 or 3 children, 4 or 5 fewer than their grandmothers. Their families were smaller, so they were getting wives for health, for education, and for other leisure facilities. During the last of the century, there was a commercial explosion, as one scholar termed, in the dissemination of population planning devices and attitudes the West. Children in middle-class families, they were very much loved and treasured, were carefully supervised. Middle class has always been concerned with the moral side of life, not to be lost only to the materialistic side of living. Middle class family was defined in terms of tangible goods, fashionable clothes, and especially a large home crowded with furniture, books, lamps, and all manners of bibelots. Culture consumption is known for this period. Then there were skilled workers and non-skilled workers. Skilled workers earned more, unskilled workers did not earn that much. But as the business was growing larger and larger, personal contact between employer and hired hand tended to disappear. It was becoming more like a corporate business. And in that industrialization, the worker also faced another difficulty to accentuate swings of business cycle. So the word unemployment was a late 19th century invention. Earlier than that, the people never had a concept of unemployment. Then in this middle class scenario, working women emerged. And they continued to supply a significant part of industrial working force, but now many more of them working outside their homes. So women found new types of work in the years, a fact commented on by the New York Times in 1869, they made up the whole America of an overwhelming majority of salespersons and cashiers in the big new departmental stores. Educated middle class women also dominated the new profession of nursing. So, to nearly all doctors, mostly men, and indeed to many women of that day, nursing seemed to be perfect female profession because of it required the same characteristics that the women have been endowed by nature: selflessness, cleanliness, kindliness, tact, sensitivity, and submissiveness to male control. For a large extent, it still exists. Then the farmers. Farmers have been the backbone of American society. Independent farmers and the agricultural way life was rapidly being left behind in the race of wealth and status. So, these farmers, by late 1880s, the old Middle West had also become better established, and on the agricultural frontier, from Texas to Dakotas and through the state of the old Confederacy, farmers were less fortunate. Frontier farm families had always had to work hard and endure the hazards of storm, drought, and insect plague. And on the plains, women also had to endure drab, cheerless surroundings without the companionship of neighbors or the respite and stimulation of a social life. We are experiencing these days by social distancing. Then what was the working class family life? Social workers started visiting homes, and so this America's, if I may call it an obsession to collect data, has started as early as then. And how they measured their life and how they expressed about that, it was being recorded by the social workers, and they compared people in different cities and the different circumstances to make a report. They were not rich. These working class families were not rich, but they managed to put aside enough money for insurance, for books, for their reading matter, and a few small luxuries. What were the working class attitudes? Number one, there was discontent, and the discontent had many causes. For some, poverty was still the chief problem, but for others, rising aspirations triggered discontent. Workers were confused. So, one can understand that the statement made in those days, those self-serving, were essentially correct when they said the poor are not poor because the rich are rich, and it carries a lot of weight. The gap between the very rich and the ordinary citizen was widening. Then Americans were encouraged to working their way up. After the Civil War, steady growth and improvement took place because by the introduction of machinery, manual training, and attracted the backing of industrialists. Organized labor was at first suspicious of the new trend. So one union leader called trade schools breeding schools for scabs and rats. But there were unrealistic expectations also by the rags to riches myth, more than the absence of real opportunity that was there. But middle class values, they respected them and tried to follow them religiously, and those values of hard work and thrift. And if you have those values, your hope will never die. Then with this expansion of industry, the new immigration started, and the new immigrants came, and they saw the same kind of attitude of new immigrants versus the old immigrants, as they were known as natives. Again I made a mistake. Again I made a mistake. The cities were expanding now. The urbanization was taking place. And Americans who favored restricting immigration made much of the fact that so many of the newcomers crowded into the cities, aggravating the problems of housing, public health, crime, immortality. Immigrants concentrated in the cities because the health was poor, housing was poor, but jobs created by expanding industry were located there. After 1890, the immigrants' concentration became much more dense. The new migrants from Eastern and Southern Europe lacked the resources to travel to the agriculturally developing regions. Short of money, almost poor, they could not have that sum of money where they could go and acquire land and farm equipment. The immigrants got attached to foreign values and institutions. Numbers of natives accused the newcomers of resisting Americanization and blamed them for urban problems. They were not creating problems, they were part of problems because the facilities were not enough to accommodate them comfortably. Then tenements started coming in. Unhealthiness of these tenements was notorious, like we have the Kachi Abadis and almost in our very big cosmopolitan cities. And along with that, when slums were bred by criminals, the wonder was that they bred so few. And the cities started getting modernized by transportation, basic facilities of urban living were improved. Streetcars and its initiation changed the character of the big city life. Before their introduction, urban communities were limited by the distances people could conveniently walk to work. But now the idea of a suburb was coming in, and these suburbs really gave them a much more healthier, free and a leisurely life. And they spend more time on fun and games. For working men, the saloon was kind of a club, a place to meet friends, exchange news and gossip, gamble and eat, as well as to drink. The gradual reduction of the workday left men with more free time, which may explain why both saloon and burlesque shows, they were called a disgraceful spectacle of padded legs juggling and tight-laced wrigglings. So the post-war era post-Civil War era saw the development of spectator sports, again because critics provided the concentration of population necessary to support them. Nobody invented baseball in America, but both football and basketball owe their present form to individuals. In 1891, this is very interesting, while a student at a YMCA school, James Naismith, attached peach baskets to the edge of an elevated running track in the gymnasium and drew up what are still the basic rules of the basketball. So football also evolved, and much of the game's modern character was work of Walter Camp, the athletic director and football coach of Yale. So it was becoming more, much regulated, and training was essential, and people have to follow a discipline, a regimen. And then the role of religion comes to keep the conscience and keep the social service at the front line of human belief. The Christian socialist advocated government and employment relief programs, public housing and slum clearance projects, and other measures designed to aid the city, the poor. This is, it becomes where people are connected to each other. People who have the facilities would like to give them to others also. The settlement houses were made. These settlement houses basically were there to accommodate an annual influx of hundreds of thousands blighted new areas more rapidly than settlement house workers. So it became increasingly apparent that the wealth and authority of the state must be brought to bear in order to keep abreast of the problem. Here the role of government came in. So civilization and its discounts, we must say that as the 19th century died, the majority of the American people, especially those comfortably well off, the residents of small towns, the shopkeepers, many farmers, and some skilled workers remained confirmed optimists and uncritical admirers of their civilization. But African Americans, immigrants, and others who failed to share equitably in the good things of life, along with a growing number of humanitarian reformers, they thought that there is much to lament and to cry. Human values seem in grave danger of being crushed to impersonal forces typified by the great corporations. So that was the first reaction to the development of urban life, the relationship of employer and the employee, and above all, the corporate business.